All right, and now I'm going to share my screen. All right, good. Here we go. I'm also going to stop my video because I tend to go back and forth on notes and a few things like that. So welcome to Civil War Soldiers. As I said, this was the one that was postponed, and I'm really grateful that so many of you were able to still come today, even though it's kind of on our off time. We're usually meeting the second, I'm sorry, I'm going to turn my, there. We usually meet the second Saturday of the month, but this one was postponed. So instead of adding it on at the end, I thought, well, we'll just do 2 in 1 month. So glad you were able to make it today. Make sure. There we go. Okay. I chose not to talk about the actual Civil War and what happened, because that would probably take an hour in and of itself. It would take, and probably even longer than that. You could probably do a whole symposium on the Civil War, and I know people have done that. Sorry, just getting a few more things fixed here. Okay. But if you want to learn more about the Civil War, there's just tons of books, tons of places to look. And I think one of the best ones that I recommend is there's several volumes of the Civil War books that Shelby Foote, F-O-O-T-E, has written. They are, phenomenal. So I would encourage you to do some reading there. If you find that your ancestor was in a particular battle or a particular area at a certain period of time, that's a good way to, kind of focus in on what that war would have been like for that soldier during that time period. So, but, how do you find out if your ancestor served in the Civil War? It's not always readily apparent when you're looking at information, but here's some clues that you can use to find the information. First look at their age and the date of birth. If they were born between somewhere around 1821 and 1846, so maybe they are in 1861, maybe they're 18 to 40 years old. That was the general range of soldiers that served in the Civil War. Although they could have been as young as 15, or they could have been as old as 50. There was a lot of loyalty, a lot of patriotism back then, and people felt compelled to serve. So you may find them. Someone as young as 15 could have been like a drummer boy. They used drums to sound charges and things like that. It could have been a bugler. They were used to kind of like football nowadays, where someone calls out a play. That's what they were used for, is to call out retreat or move forward, things like that. Look at death records too. If they died between 1861 and 1865, maybe they possibly could have been in a war. Not always. I know in the Shelby area around 1861 there was a lot of death from some kind of an epidemic that was going on. I think I talked about that in one of my previous talks. But generally, if it was a man and between 1861 and 1865, it's something you should investigate. If they died in a different state than where they were living in 1860, that could be a clue too. If they died in Tennessee or someplace other than where they should have been living at that point. 1861 is a good census. to look at to see where your ancestor might have been during that time period. And we'll talk about that later, why that's important. Another place to look is tombstones. These are two Marvin family members. The one on the left is Tip Marvin, and you can see there's a little star in front of his tombstone. That means that he was in the GAR, and the GAR was the Grand Army of the Republic. It was a service organization that was formed after the Civil War, so that the men could continue to meet, and because a lot of the men came from the same area and served in the same unit. So it was a way for them to, keep in touch with each other and, and carry on all of that camaraderie that they had during the war. The one on the right is Daniel Sherwood Marvin, and he actually donated the building that Marvin Memorial Library is housed in now, that beautiful Civil War era house in the front. He never lived in it, but he bought it and then gave it to the Library Association to use as a library. It's kind of hard to see at the very top, but there's that same kind of star that says GAR on it. And then down below, there's some kind of folded flags, and there's some writing below it. I'm going to actually have to go out to the cemetery and see what that says. But I pulled these from Find a Grave. But there's a little bit of writing. Sometimes on the tombstones, they actually put the unit that the man served in. So that's something that you might want to look for too. There's several censuses that you might want to look at that may give you a clue for the information. Now, the 1890 census, for the most part, burned, but there were some veteran schedules that survived. They were special schedules that were doing for the surviving soldiers, sailors, Marines, widows, etc. This one was from Pennsylvania, and there's a Henry Burgess on there that's on the first line. It's not my Henry Burgess. Mine was from Indiana. But I don't think those records survive. But so we'll look at this one from Pennsylvania. You can see his rank was corporal. He was in Company D. He was in the 50th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry, I'm supposing. And then his date of enlistment, which is really good information to have, 6 September 1861. His date of discharge was 1 October 1864. So you can see the last one, length of service, he served 3 years and 25 days. That was a long time. Most of them served maybe a year. Some of them came back, served a year and then came back and served more time. So it's really, you can see how you can start to pull out the different pieces of information. So now we know that this man is, he was in the 50th Pennsylvania. So now we can do some research on that unit to see where they were and the types of things that they did. The 1910 census, I've only given you a little bit of this. This is my ancestor, John Green Troop, John G. Troop. And he served in the Confederate Army. You can see the third to the last column on the left says CA. So there were some shortcuts to this. So UA would have meant Union Army, UN, Union Navy, CA, Confederate Army, CN, Confederate Navy. There's also a 1930 census. I didn't include that one. Most of them had died by that point. So it's most of them had died by that point. So you know, but it is a place to look. If you know that an ancestor was still alive in 1930, you might want to look at that record. Another place to look is obituaries. This isn't quite an obituary, but it gives you a really good background in the information and you know, where Tip was and what he did. And it's I love this newspaper article because basically it says taps have been sounded and T.S. Marvin answered to the last earthly roll call, December 31st, 1913. And it talks about where he was born, in a farm in Jackson Township. He worked for the Big Four Railroad for a short period of time before he decided to go into the military. And it says, on the 15th of April, 1861, when the smoke from Fort Sumter's guns had scarcely cleared away, he offered his services to the government to the first call for aid. He was the 5th name upon the roll. He enlisted in Company A, 15th Ohio Infantry. So it goes on to tell about some of the places where he was on duty. So these are things that, you know, later on you might want to look up in The War of the Rebellion, the set of books that I'm going to tell you about later, and find out, you know, where he was in these different periods of time and what he might have been doing then. So really, really cool information on there. Letters. You might have family letters, family, you know, history, you know, mementos from the war. I don't know if you'd call them actually mementos, but anyway, the library actually has Tip Marvin's sword. It was donated by the family to the library. So, you know, and it hangs above the desk in the library. So really cool piece of history now that, you know, that we have from the Civil War. This one I just happened to pull off a website and had no idea when I started reading it. It was really pretty cool. This private Joseph Saberton, he was in the Company C, 25th Indiana Volunteer Infantry. He was actually court-martialed for a mutiny. He basically took out his gun and started pointing it at people, officers, and tried to load it. Wouldn't give it up. So he was charged with mutiny with a couple of other men. He was sentenced. He was actually found. He pled not guilty, but he was actually charged and he was sentenced to 1 year of hard labor with a ball and chain and an honorable discharge. But he never served a day of it because it was all forgiven because he had good conduct other than that incident. But here's a letter that he wrote home to a brother on May 29th. It was a few months. This happened in March, so a couple months after it happened. I received your letter today, and it could not have come at a better time than today, for this is payday for us. I was very glad to plan you wise well. Some of the transcription on this, probably if I saw the original, I could probably figure out what it was really supposed to say, and all the folks too. I was out on picket yesterday again. We went out the day before that, but our whole regiment was ordered out with the brigade. We advanced on P center line about 1.5 miles yesterday, and we had a warm time in doing it. In our charge we made in the rebel pickets, the 2 men next to me were killed dead. That's what I call close shaving. They belonged to the 14th Illinois, a regiment in our brigade. But we cleaned them out, he means the rebels. But we cleaned them out and held our ground and threw up by castworks and fixed our batteries. We were relieved by the 1st Brigade, who took our place today. We do not know when we shall have a general fight here. It is hard to tell. So this is in camp near Corinth, Mississippi. And then he says, you speak, I don't have the whole letter on here, but the second paragraph. You speak of my being clear of my scrape. I tell you that I am perfectly clear of it, or else I could not have received my full pay today. Those damned fools that come home and tell their, it says yams, I think they meant yarns. I think he probably wrote yarns. Tell their yarns about those left behind would outlie the devil. I am just as clear as any soldier in the regiment. Nearly all the officers that were on my court-martial were either killed or wounded in Pittsburgh, and the colonel restored me to duty free of all charges. Wow, what a letter. So, did your ancestors serve in the Union or the Confederacy? Most men that followed along the lines of their states, they followed along the lines of their own states. You will find, though, that there may be some Confederate units that were in what are called northern states, and there will be some Union units in the southern states. You can see there's 4 states there that were called border states, and according to this map, they were a Union slave state. So they were Union, fighting Union, but they had slaves. So you're going to see, especially Kentucky, West Virginia, you're going to find Union and Confederate units in those states. So this is a really good map. I love this, from National Geographic. They also kind of need to know what county, because the men didn't travel very far from where they lived to join up. So you'll want to know what county, and you can usually find that from like the 1960 census or so. You can find out what county they might have been living in right before they started taking people in 1961. This is from my 4 times great-grandfather, John Green Troop is what we know him by. He enlisted in the 8th Infantry Regiment. It was organized at Camp Truesdale in Sumner County, Tennessee in May of 1861. There's a lot of counties on here. Usually they just recruited from maybe one county or maybe a county in an adjacent county. This is a lot of counties. He was either in Lincoln or Marshall at the time. I think he was in Marshall County. So you'll see that it's really important to know, what county they were in. So this is record, and this is probably one of the first places that you want to look when you're actually kind of convinced that you might have a Civil War soldier in your family. You'll want to look on the Civil War Soldiers and Sailors database, and it's on the nationalparkservice.gov website, and it's a fantastic site. It's got a huge database of both Confederate and Union soldiers. So here's my John Green Troop, and he definitely was in the 8th Regiment, Tennessee Infantry, Confederacy. He was in Company I. He was a corporal when he came in, and he was a private when he came out. I'm not quite sure what happened there. Something else to investigate at some point. A tip here, you might find several men with the same name. So then it's kind of a process of elimination. You have to look and see whether, what state he might have been in, and then, start looking at the units and see if the units were in the county where your ancestor was in. So it's kind of a process of elimination. Usually you can tell just by the state that they were in. Even at that, it's not foolproof. Most of the time this is correct, but sometimes if they were in an area where, that was mostly Confederate and they wanted to join in a Union group, they might have gone to an adjacent state. They might have gone actually to, another state entirely. to join up. So, but for the most part, you know, where they were in 1860 is probably where you're going to find them in, you know, as a unit in the war. So once you've, you know, have a good idea now, you know what unit they might have served in and that they indeed were probably in the Civil War, then you'll want to start looking for the actual records. And one of the places that you'll look is in the Compiled Military Service Records, CMSRs. And each soldier had one for each unit they were in. Normally they stayed in the same unit throughout the war, not always. There's always, I'm going to say this probably through the whole thing, not always. It's not one, you know, it's not like cut and dried. But for the most part, you know, you're probably going to find them in the places that I just mentioned. So this is from John G. Troop, Company I, it says, 8th Tennessee, Confederate, Colonel, Private. So we know all that information already, right? So if you'll see under there, there's card numbers. This is actually an envelope. Each one had documents that they put in an envelope to keep. So he's got, what, 5, this one shows 5 different records in there. There's actually more than that, but each record that was put in there had a document number on it. So that's what that number is there. I found this on Fold 3. You can get to Fold 3 through the library, through the Ohio Web Library. You can get to Fold 3 for free by using your library card to sign in. So great resource. A lot of these records, this is all you may see on Fold 3, is this envelope with the general information in front. I was very lucky, especially this being a Confederate record, that they actually showed all the records that were in that packet. So, for example, these are all muster rolls for John Troop. And so what muster rolls are, during a certain period of time, if you look at the second one over, it says company muster roll of the organization named above for August 31st to December 31st, 1862. So it doesn't mean that he, you know, if you look down below, it says absent wounded. So it doesn't mean that he was not in that unit. He was absent from that whole time period. On the date that they actually did the muster, which was November 24th, 1862, he wasn't there. He just, you know, he was absent, you know, but he could have been, you know, in that unit, and he probably was in that unit for the whole time period up until he got wounded at the Battle of Stones River in Murfreesboro, and that was in December 31st. So he evidently was wounded before that, which I didn't know, so that's new information for me. The first one is actually from the Battle of Murfreesboro, because it says December 31st on there. It says severely wounded, so it says appears on a list of casualties, severely wounded. So I've got that information now. And then you'll see a couple of other. The third one over, he was actually present for the muster roll. It was May and June in 1862, and it was taken on May 16th, and he shows his present then. So they say in present, entitled to 3 months pay as a corporal and 1 month as a private. So something happened in that time frame where he was demoted for some reason. So that's a mystery, and I'll have to do some more research on that. I'm not quite sure why. So here's more. These are kind of the same things. The second one over is talking about the fact that he was discharged July 16th, 1862 at Tupelo, Mississippi, and then he rejoined in November, just shortly before the Battle of Murfreesboro, where the Battle of Stones River, when he was injured. So if he had gone home and stayed home, he probably would have been fine. When the soldiers first joined, they only asked them to join for 3 months. They just figured the battle's not gonna, the war is not going to last very long, and we'll have you home in 3 months. And then when they started realizing, oh, that's not happening, and and people are leaving the military, then they tried to entice them to come back. So then they were serving. They asked them to serve for a year, and then it as the war dragged on, it became kind of an open. As long as they would stay until they're wounded or die, they needed them. So, but this gives me some really good information too. I know that he was actually discharged at a point, and then he decided to come back. So this was also in the packet, which is a really cool one. This is actually his discharge papers from Tupelo, Mississippi. So a certificate to be given to a soldier at the time of his discharge. So it gives you all this, really good information. And actually, I guess he was in Lincoln County when he joined up, because that's got that information in there. Again, it says he was a private when he left. So there's something that happened that, that he was demoted. It talks about the amount of money that he was to be given as he left. And I think it was $83. Part of it was $27.13 for clothing not drawn. So evidently some of the clothing he did not get, so they paid him for it. Most of these documents I've had to split into sections because otherwise you're not going to be able to even read them on the screen, and even at that they're a little bit hard to read. But this is you're gonna learn about this next month. But see down here where it says Tupelo, Mississippi, that MI weird looking, almost looks like an F and then an S. That's a double S. And you'll learn about that next month in our, I think it's next month, in our old handwriting class. Here's the bottom of that form again. And it says, actually he was paid $83. So I guess there were a couple of things that, that he was paid, probably his salary pay as he left, and then some pay for clothing. So he paid $55.87 for being there. The really cool thing about this document is look down at the very bottom. Look at that, John G. Troop. There's his handwriting. That's awesome. So now I've never seen his handwriting before. So isn't that cool? So let's see. One more thing I want to say before we go to pension records is, if you only have that envelope cover for your ancestor, but you're seeing listings on there, document numbers on there, that means there are more documents. To get those, they're all stored at the National Archives. And so what you'll have to do is, I've given you the link on there to order compiled military service records from NARA. There's the link. It's $30. You can get either a hard copy sent to you through the mail, or you can ask for a PDF file of it, and you can download it to your own computer. It's $30 either way, but I would highly suggest that you pay the money to get that compiled service record in there. Union records especially are going to have a little bit more information. They're going to have more information about whether they were hospitalized for wounds, and where and what happened to them, and so you never know what's in those compiled service records. But so it's a good idea to to go in and order them and see what's there. You just never know. Like I said, I was lucky enough that my record, it looks like everything was probably already digitized and put on fold 3 for this Confederate record. But some are, some aren't. So you may have to go to NARA to get the records. So now I want to talk about pension records. And these are the records that you really want to find, because they have so much information in them. Each soldier could apply for a pension, and this was, years after the war. They decided that, they really needed to help these soldiers out, especially ones that were wounded. So they started a pension for them, and the pension changed through the years. If you want to know what kinds of pensions they were eligible for in various time periods, search for pension records, and it'll give you that information on there. There's several places, and I've given you links throughout where you can also find these pension records. I think I found these actually on ancestry.com, or Family Search. It might have been either one. Like I said, fantastic information on here. So now we have John G. Troop. He was from the state of Tennessee. He was a resident of Tally. That's Tally. And I didn't know that, but if I hadn't known that, I've got a city or an area where he lived, so County of Marshall. Solemnly swear that while in the discharge of my duty in the service of the Confederate or United States as a member of the Confederate Army, I was wounded in the battle or battles of Murfreesboro on Stones River. And from the effects of such wounds, I was disabled as follows. I was shot through the thigh. Shot through the leg, in the thigh. And I don't, letters, or I thought it was tendons, but I've seen this throughout, and that L is not crossed like a T, so I'm not sure. But anyway, shot through the lie. I think it might have been like the tendons or ligaments of his leg. So basically he was shot in the thigh, and later we find that it was in the left thigh. So then, and this is another one of those long forms. So it gives you, look at this background information. It gives you what county, state, and year you were born in. Lincoln County, Tennessee, and born in the October 14th, 1823. When did you enlist and what command? All this information. They actually have the names of the commanders that he was with. So if you're looking, later, like in the War of the Rebellion, or, some other state history, here's the names of the captains, so you can follow the captains. He was colonels and captains and others that he was fighting with. They were his officers, was my officers at the time I received my wounds. So they were there with him. And then again, in what battle? Murfreesboro. Here again, what was the precise nature of your wound or wounds? So it goes into detail. I was shot in the leg in which, cut the, whatever that is, tendons of my leg, which has greatly impaired same. So then what limb, if any, did you lose by reason of wound? If no limb, state the disability caused by the wounds. So it was a right. Again, tendons of my leg is drawed, and it hurts me to walk, and is permanent, and am also ruptured and have rheumatism. Were you incapacitated for service by reason of said wounds? Yes. Were you discharged from the Army by reason of said wounds, or service? Answer, no. I had this translated at one point. My surgery, but they would not take me and failed. Basically, they wouldn't take him back after his wounds, but they didn't give him a discharge, but then he didn't ask for a discharge either. And then it says, if discharged from the Army, where were you and what did you do until the close of the war? Answer, I was at home. My wife died, and I had 7 little children to see after. Oh. So now I'll go back and I'll find out which children were still at home and which wife died. He actually had 5 wives through his life and 13 children. So I have to figure out which ones were still at home. And then it actually gives the name of the surgeon, Dr. Dance, I think, of Lynchburg, Tennessee. So that might be interesting. He's now dead, it says. That might be interesting to look up that information too and see, who Dr. Dance was, what types of things that he usually did as a doctor during the war. So this each pension record, because he was claiming a wound, disability, he had to go to a doctor, and a doctor had to, basically verify, what was wrong with him. So this is Dr. McRoby, I think it was, or McRoby. I saw it 2 different ways, spelled 2 different ways, but anyway. He has chronic rheumatism from which he at times suffers. The last 6 months, he has been totally disabled in one arm and hand. He is also ruptured from which he suffers at times. He also suffers at times with rheumatism and cramps in the muscles of leg where he was wounded. So at the bottom of this form, there's a place where some of his former soldier friends, some of the men that were in the same unit, are able to testify about him too. So this one's from George Foster and G.W. Russell. They talk about the fact that they knew him, that he was in the same company and regiment, always found him ready to do his duty, and any and all times never refusing to do duty were assigned him. We also know that he was discharged at Tupelo, Mississippi, and afterwards returned to the same company and regiment. So here's 2 more people, your friends, acquaintances, and neighbors, your fan club. So these are 2 more people that, that may have written letters home that you might find online, or, in another repository. Maybe they have some stories too that can help to, to understand my ancestor. This is another one. This one's, it does look like Dr. McRady. He had to provide some more information about the actual wounds. And so this talks about the wounds shot through the thigh. He claims that his leg draws and pains him at times, just as it did soon after he was shot. He can't walk any distance without suffering. He's also feeble from old age and sickness, and will not be able to work any soon. He and his wife and daughter, so there's a daughter still at home, in 1901 when he submitted this. He and his wife and his daughter get their support from the rent that the boys pay for their little farm. He is in debt and is in need of help, and he is worthy. So again, at the bottom of this form, again, we have two of the Foster brothers this time, GW and Fred. And they, both are saying, yes, he was in the Confederate Army. We were both with him during service, and he made a good soldier, and they know him to have been wounded as stated. So also in this pension packet that I found was a letter. He had to say a letter that, of basically, what he owned. The county court actually wrote this on his behalf, and it John G. Troop is assessed for taxes for the year 1906, and so this is a few years after he probably got the pension. At Marshall County with 46 acres of land valued at $750. So, wow, I didn't know the farm was that small. I thought it was a lot bigger. Normally, on a homestead, you get 80 acres. So at some point this was, this was split, and he has a smaller farm. So more information. Isn't this cool? I mean, here I'm building a whole snapshot of what my ancestor looked like and would have done. So one thing, let me go back here real quick and see if I can find it again. I think it would have been no, I don't. Oh yes, there it is. For his discharge, if you look about the fourth line, third line down at the very end, it says Lincoln County in the state of Tennessee. He was 38 years old. He was 5 foot 11 inches tall. That's fairly tall for somebody during that time frame. He was a tall man, evidently. Didn't know that. Dark complexion. He was not black, but he had a very dark complexion, I guess, probably from, I don't know, from what. Black eyes, and by profession a farmer. So yeah, more information. How about that? That's really cool that I didn't know. I didn't know he was that tall. I'd heard before that he had kind of a dark complexion. We thought maybe Native American, but that's not showing up in my DNA, so I don't know. But he could have been. We don't know. Let me go back here. So widows could have pensions too after the male soldier died. So his fifth wife, Mrs. Ellen Troop, filed for pension after he died. And here's her pension file. So there's questions again for applicant. I thought that she lived in Petersburg because that's where they were living when he died. But evidently when they got married, she was living in a place called Delrose, Tennessee. So that's another place to kind of do some research. On the wedding marriage record that I'll show you in a minute, her name was Ellen Nove. And but here it says McGuire, and Nove is kind of added in. So that's interesting too. So it looks like kind of she was married before she married John. So so she may have been Irish, McGuire. They didn't have any children together. I mean, both of them were, you know, older by that point, so there were no children. Again, it gives them some information about where, you know, where was your husband born? So she has to go through all that. What regiment was he in? So there's, you know, more information there. Number 9, he left the command before the surrender on account of a wound or sickness out there. So a lot of, you know, a lot more really good information that kind of helps to build the story. This is the bottom part of that record too. What property do you own? You know, what did you possess at the time of the husband's death? You know, do you have any family? So, you know, if you're researching her part of the family, there's, you know, one sister, and it even has the name Emma Witt, being supported by her children, and owns no basically no property. So here's the marriage certificate, and you can see there's Ellen Nave on there along with John Troop. So, you know, here I've got the marriage record now. I know when they were married in Lincoln County. So what are some other records, you know, that you can look at to help kind of build the story of your Civil War ancestor? One of the best places to look is called the War of the Rebellion. It is volume upon volume upon volume. If you ever go in a library and they have the whole record, the whole book set, it's, you know, it's massive. Takes up, you know, several bookshelves. But you can find all this online on the collections library of Cornell University. They have recently, you can still find this index on the Cornell site, but they are actually housing the books on that Hattie website that that we talked about during the last session with the women, hidden women. So you have that link there. But you can get to it from these links here. But you can see there's all kinds of information in there. Military operations in the field. Every time they had a battle, every time they moved somewhere, the officers in charge had to write a report. So, you know, all these reports are there. So you can actually track, you know, your unit, what happened during those different battles. I mean, there's just so much information in here. Correspondence, orders, reports relating to prisoners of war. So if you had an ancestor who was a POW in the Civil War, you'll probably find some information there. Any correspondence with the upper group, like the Secretary of War, the General-in-Chief, and even national and state authorities, is, you know, all compiled in these books. It's massive. And, you know, just to give you a little idea here right now, it you know, it has operations in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, you know, and it goes on down through the cessation of Alabama and Mississippi, operations in Florida, North Carolina, Louisiana. So if you know where your ancestor was, you know, fighting at different periods of time, you can go to, you know, that actual chapter and you can find out more information. You may even see your ancestor's name. More than likely, if he was an officer, you probably are going to see the names. Photographs are another thing to help you tell the story. Matthew Brady was a well-known photographer through the Civil War. Up until that point, photographs are really just not more than, you know, portraits. no one went out and actually, just because of the way that you had to take the photo and handle the, you know, the film, the negative. It wasn't really a negative, but that you can see here, they were like glass plates. The way that you had to handle all of it, I mean, it just wasn't conducive to field conditions, but he was actually able to do that. He was actually able to go out into the field, and he, you know, and he filmed, you know, some of the battles. You couldn't, you know, you couldn't film movement; it would just blur everything. But you know, if you ever get a chance to go through Matthew Brady's photos, they're just phenomenal, especially the ones from Gettysburg. He was there through the entire war too and took pictures. The picture in the top left-hand corner is from a field hospital, so you get an idea of, you know, what happened there. The one on the bottom left is a pontoon bridge that was built so that they could ford the river there. And then the one in the middle is actually a on the Civil War battlefield, one of the battlefields. So. And then on the one on the right is some of the soldiers that were Confederate soldiers that were wounded, so they were awaiting transportation to get back to a field hospital. Both the Library of Congress and the National Archives have photo collections, so well worth looking at. Some of them are a bit gruesome. He does film the dead in some of them, but quite phenomenal for that time period to be able to capture those images. So one thing I didn't put on your list, but very, very important, are maps. You can find maps on Library of Congress, the National Archives, and then this site, which I talked about a little bit last time, was davidrumsey.com. And if you go to his site and then search for Civil War, you're going to find a ton of maps from the Civil War period that actually have battles marked on them. This was the first day of Gettysburg. And I'm sorry that it's so small, but if you look in the upper third, you're going to see a whole bunch of blue lines. Those were actually that's the order of battle. That's the troops that were there at that time frame. So if you zoom in on them, you can actually see, you know, the troop movement and where they were. So incredible, you know, really incredible maps. Newspaper articles. You know, if you know where your ancestor lived, you could go to newspapers.com, genealogybank.com, even, you know, a lot of the newspapers like the Shelby Globe are now digitized and they're put online. So, you know, search for your ancestor and, you know, and see what comes up. This was a very well-known person in town, David Lockard Cockley, and he actually keeled over the day after Christmas in 1901 of a heart attack. And the procession that they had for him out to the cemetery was incredible. The mausoleum wasn't built then, but the first mausoleum as you come into the Oakland Cemetery is David Cockley's. He was a phenomenal businessman after the war, and he was helped found the Tubi, what we call the Tubi, the Shelby. It was the Shelby seamless tube company that was the first one that was built here. And you can see that there's just a whole bunch of information that was kind of included in the article when he died. Places where he lived. He actually earned, I don't know if it actually says in here, but he earned the Congressional Medal of Honor. in the Civil War. So he was one of the first that was recognized there. So you know, you may get lucky. You may find something like this that gives you know, more information about the battles and you know, where the soldier was in certain periods of time. The newspapers might also carry draft lists and casualty lists, you know, for those units that were stationed, you know, that came from that area. So well worth looking through newspapers, you know, searching not only for your ancestor, but for the unit that the ancestor served in, because that's going to give you some more information too. Other research aids, the Family Search Wiki is incredible. If you go to, you know, to the wiki in familysearch.org and you just type in the word Civil War, it will come up with this, you know, with the same URL that I've given you. And it says how to get started in the Civil War. It gives you links, link upon link upon link of, you know, places to go, places to look, things like that. The other thing you'll want to do is search by Civil War and then Tennessee or whatever state they might have lived in. You can search that way and see what comes up. There should be links to different things. And also search through the wiki for the unit, because quite a few of the units are listed in the wiki and they give you more information in that respect. So Family Search Wiki is, you know, when you really start to do some research, that's a great place to start. And don't forget about the Ohio Genealogical Society too. They have on their brand new website, they have an extensive repository for Ohio units. And they also have a lineage society now. I think it's in its maybe second or third year, devoted to Civil War soldiers. And it doesn't have to be just a direct line. You can also nominate, you know, brothers of your direct line to this lineage society. So, you know, well worth looking into it once you get all of your information compiled. If your ancestor lived in Ohio, it'd be great to have them in that lineage society. And then the last thing I would just, you know, recommend to you is just to Google the unit, because a lot of states have histories of the different units. A lot of just personal people have, you know, have created histories, have written books. So you just never know what you'll find. So I really hope that you'll just Google some things and, you know, and see what comes up. So, all right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and get us back to where we can talk and you can ask questions. So let me see. I'm going to start my video again. Here we go. And you should be able to take yourselves off mute, I think. And you can also activate your video, I think. Let's see. So, okay, we have two chats. Let's see what we've got in the chat. Oh, cut leaders of leg, what they call the tendon. Thank you, Jody. Wasn't quite sure. I didn't know what it looked like. Lendon it looked like, so it's leaders. And then check into Italian ancestry. I have a question on that, DJ, so maybe you can clarify that one. Oh, if he's still on. I'm not sure if he's still on.
I just have a friend of Italian descent, and
Ah,
oftentimes they have a dark complexion listed. Just a guess.
oh, I see. They would have called it that. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Um, are you all seeing the regular screen now? I'm trying to get back to it to go. Oh, I think okay. Um, it could have been that I thought they were a British descent because Troop is spelled like 5 different names: Troup, Troupe, Throop early on. So, but yeah, maybe Italian. I'll have to look at that. Good. Um, Other questions?
You have the name of the lineage society for the soldiers in Ohio.
I think it's just called the Civil War soldiers. Let me see if I can look it up on my phone here. But if you go to ogs.org, you'll be able to find it.
Okay.
Let me see if I can. Any other questions while I'm looking it up?
One more question I missed. I was helping my husband get out the door. Um, he's racing today.
Uh,
You mentioned, and I had him listening. You mentioned a place to send away for the records for a soldier. Could
yes,
you remind me of what that was?
sure. It's on, I'll tell you, were you able to download the notes I gave you?
You know what? I didn't try to do that. I was.
That's okay.
So it's in the notes. Okay, fabulous.
Yeah, it's in the notes about halfway down the second page. I can't get to the OGS site here on my phone because I actually have it on. I have it on as my secondary here. So,
Yeah, I've been doing the same.
but if you go to ogs.org and then it has there's a it's up in the top listing. It'll say more about or something like that in Lineage Society. Yeah, anyway, the compiled, both the compiled records and the pension records you can get from NARA, and it's archives.gov/veterans. So it'll be that about halfway down. It says to order compiled military service records.
Okay.
And then, like I said, I think there's also there should be a link too for the pension records, but you can get to it from the same place.
Okay.
It's about $30 for the compiled service records, but I've heard that it's more than that from the pension records, just because there could be a ton of pension records. Because like you saw with mine, it was, and that was just the Confederate, the Union information. There's a lot more. They just kept a lot more
So
hospital records.
the pension records would be separate than the service records.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was printing. I'm working on a family member that was in the War of 1812, and I've been printing those records, the pension records from Fold 3, and it's like an inch thick. I had to stop printing. It was so if I would pay $30 to get that,
Yeah.
all nice, neat, and printed out. Yeah, that's a deal.
Yeah. Yeah, now, and the pension records I've heard, I mean, they could be up to $90 or something. I didn't find that on the website. I was listening to another webinar and the man said, you know, $90, and but I didn't see that on the form. What I saw was $30, but so,
I would suppose, because this one was interesting because it had a lot of correspondence, and at one point she thought she had given the information to someone and she thought she had been taken. So there was a lot of just personal correspondence, and it was really cool that they had the envelopes in which, you know, you could see the stamps and how they were. So that was really cool. And so yeah, maybe because certain ones are very detailed and other records might not be so fleshed out.
oh yeah, yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, and you can see, I mean, the ones that I didn't have to write for anything on the ones that I found, so you can find some of these online. But if you don't, I do know that when I was searching before for some of the union ones, all they had was the cover, the envelope cover for the CS service records, and so that, you know, at that point you're probably going to have to. You know, write and get the original. And if you want, you know, a good copy, because some of these copies were kind of, some of them were a little bit hard to read. Handwriting was hard to read. I think if I probably should have transcribed them before I did the talk, so that I would take some time to think about what they said. But yeah, let's see. We have from Kathy Webb. I have a draft list from Sandusky County about 1862, which includes 3 persons named Nicholas Wall, one of whom married a direct ancestor. I have not yet found records of further service. Is it reasonable that men would have been called up but did not enlist? Yes. They could have been called up, and they could have, there's a couple of things that they could have done. They could have paid like $300 to get out of the enlistment, or they could have asked someone else to serve for them and paid, you know, usually you have to pay somebody to serve for you, but they, you know, they could have done that too. So just because he, you know, he was called up doesn't mean that he actually served. So it might be interesting to see if he actually paid someone else to serve, or if he just, you know, decided to pay the $300 so he wouldn't have to serve. Kathy, that would be really interesting to, you know, to find out. Cool. Any other questions, or?
So if that were the case, sorry for speaking out, I probably should be typing this in, but if that were the case and you paid someone to do your turn of duty, would that be listed somewhere, that someone went in your stead, or would it just be blank like that? Is that the norm, that you just wouldn't have a service record?
Yeah, he wouldn't, I don't think he would have a service record, but, you know, but the person that was asked to do that would, but you'd have to figure out who that would be,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to check on that service record. You know, I don't know, that kind of information might be in a local newspaper, because they had, you know, they did have draft lists in there. It could be in a local newspaper. It could be, I'm not sure that there was an actual record. I'd have to do some more digging on that. But I do know that, you know, that they were able to pay. You know, and in the South, a lot of people that had slaves, I mean, that was just what they did. They sent the slaves in their stead. So that's why there were, you know, there were a lot of colored units. They called them colored units at the time. And they did the same thing.
There's a family rumor, well, myth, whatever you want to call it, that my great uncle George, or ancestor Uncle George is what they called him, served for someone else. He went one turn for his own and then went back for somebody else. And I remember it was supposedly $300, but we always wondered who he went for, because after that he was wounded and passed from that wound. But for $300. But then again, that was a lot of money. for
Oh, yeah.
Scrabble farmers. But so I always wondered, was there a list to say who he served for?
Yeah, and that might take some digging. In my research, I didn't really see a place where you could, go to look for that information. It was just said that was done, one thing that was done. And I think it might have been in reference to the draft lists that were printed in the newspapers at some times. I know we have kind of a spotty 1861 newspaper that's on the Marvin Memorial Library. It would have been probably Shelby Times or Shelby Independent, something like that at the time. But you may find it in other places too, wherever your ancestor was that you're searching for. Look in their newspapers if they have them online, hopefully.
Yeah, Kentucky. It was Southern Kentucky. So I'll dig into that. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have old handwriting next month, if I remember right. So it'll be the same second Tuesday of the month. So actually coming up in a couple of weeks, I guess. So that's always a fun one. I like to look at that one. All right. Thank you so much for your time today. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks.